Hello, dear Mindfulness Collective. This right here, right now, is the joy of being a live stream coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York. Lovely as always to see you here. See you here, feel all of those, all of the above. Folks, lovely as always to be here with you. I'm gonna scooch myself in. What an exciting day. Oh, that's so sweet. My wife just brought me a giant tub of green stuff, half of which is not mine, but she didn't have time to divide it. This, my friends, is a slimy green breakfast. Again, you might be asking, what are you doing eating breakfast at 11 a.m.? Well, sometimes I intermittently fast calories earlier in the day, and then that transitions to be a bit of an ongoing challenge. Okay, let's see here. All right, come on. I want the camera. I want to move the camera. Oh, there we go. Much better. Okay, folks, welcome, 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 welcome. Good to see you here. It is always a delight to have you in our living room with our cute little whiny dog. I don't know if you can hear the dog whining away. But yes, indeedy, we are very happy to be here with you now. Okay, so folks, we got Lewis coming in from Yorkshire. We got Jean coming in from Brooklyn. Where are you coming from? Other folks who are joining us. We put out a I'm really happy, really fun video. If you were on the stream, it probably looks a little familiar. It's actually a video from the stream just the other day. And today we're going to be exploring this question of entering the void. There is a user on our stream entry who asked a question, and I thought it was a really interesting question. Some of the responses were interesting, I'll say that. They didn't align with my personal experience, so I thought maybe I could be helpful. Powerful Strong is the name of the user on Reddit, and they asked a question about what to do when they are experiencing what we might call the void. And we're going to be continuing our theme here because part of what we're doing is exploring this relationship between some of the transcendent materials, such as, in particular, we might say entering the void, and at the same time exploring how that relates to our internal landscape, and when is it appropriate to dig into some of the stranger side, and when is it actually more skillful to work on our own psychology, and when can we do both at the same time? Good morning from West Virginia, Nate and Rory here joining us. Welcome, folks. Great to see you. Glad you're here with us. Always a delight. My dog has found all of the noisiest things right as we're about to start the stream, which is adorable, but ultimately must be remedied. Dog, silence yourself. Excellent. So folks, where are folks joining us from? We have a whole crew going now. Folks, we're going to be meditating, and I think what we'll do is we'll actually meditate on this question about entering the void. And as you know, we've been doing freestyle meditations recently, so I'm not going to be, sort of plugging some random meditation out of my memory hole. I'll actually be sort of digging into this particular material and ideally exploring this question of when does it make sense to enter the void material. What might happen, though, is this recognition that happens sometimes, that sometimes it's easier to talk about a subject than to guide through it. But we'll see. Maybe it's actually fully appropriate to guide through this material. So, beep, boop, boop, bop. I'm going to ask my wife to cage our doggy. Okay, the power went out on my microphone, but I turned it back. So, okay. So, the topic du jour. We're going to be doing a little meditation. So, folks, finding a very nice, comfortable seated position. What on earth? Okay, and especially if folks aren't familiar with meditation or you are relatively new, let me know and I can add a little dip here. If not, then we'll just jump right in. My general suggestion is to keep the body still for the duration of the practice. So finding I hit a spot of this freaky green drink that was unmitigated green powder, undiluted, a real sticky resin of intensive green powder. The green powder that I like and use is called Green Vibrance. It is a bruiser. I think it's sort of agreed that it's kind of the tippy top green powder. So look who wins this round. Okay, so folks, find that nice comfortable position that you can maintain for the duration of the sit. And once you find yourself there, we will begin. Okay, we'll begin. Beginning by taking a few comfortable deep breaths and just feeling the body rise and fall. Each time we arrive at a meditation, we arrive with the momentum of all of the previous moments. So zooming into our current sensory experience, and feeling that effect. What is the effect of all of these previous moments? We can't know the causes, but we can know the effect, and that is this current sensory universe. Recognizing that it's the nature of the mind to at times be balanced, to have a comfortable balance between attention and awareness. It's the nature of the mind to at times be agitated. We know this experience by attending to some sense activity, Noticing how does the mind hold this experience? Is it jittery? Bouncing from here to there? This is what we might call hyperactive. And on the other hand, the mind can be hypoactive, dull, foggy, sleepy. And often the answer to each of these overcorrections is to move in the other direction. So if the mind is quite agitated, hyperactive, adding a bit more calm, softness, perhaps zooming out just a bit. If the mind is hypoactive, adding a bit more brightness, vividness. By adding, we simply mean attend to. Attending to this quality will move the mind in this direction. If we have our own samadhi or balance of mind practice, we can engage in that now. Or if we'd like, we can begin by holding an open awareness of all of the body sensations together. Not worrying about missing some here or there. We're just trying to get a general sense of all. A general sense of the collective pattern of body activity. All that is pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And from this place we can choose. Do we stay with this general overall sense of the body? Simple awareness of body activity, regardless of what it is? Do we find some particular body activity and let that detail be part of this larger mix, so there's some attention on perhaps the detail of the breath, while we maintain an overall awareness of the body? Or if we'd like, we could allow our attention to float freely, coming in contact with any particular body sensation, but being sure to detect and experience that sensation in relationship to the whole, the collective awareness of the sensations of the body, whichever feels like it would most likely support continuous awareness. As we do this, noticing that there's parts of our experience that seem quite solid, seem quite present. There's no sense that they are not there. They're simply being experienced as being there. Not overthinking this, just attending to the presentness. Of whatever constellation of senses we're following. This is one way to avoid drifting into dullness, is being sure we're connecting with these particular sensations in this particular moment. Not letting the mind convince us that these are generic sensations. And knowing that the mind experiences the world through contrast, comparing one instant to its sensory experience. Something feels present. Something else is not present. So letting go of observing the breath or the body in particular, and observing the presentness of all of our sensory experience, seeing, hearing, feeling. And this may seem strange, but the presentness of these experiences are shown to the mind out of contrast. These are novel. They have appeared. If it was always this way, the mind likely couldn't detect it, couldn't detect this new experience. So our senses are showing us this novel contact point, continuously regenerating. So noticing the newness of these experiences, their presentness, their solidity in our experience. This is one reason the mind tends to experience things as not impermanent. The mind tends to see the world as very stable because our experiences are so clearly given to us as present. And the mind rarely tracks what happens next. So for a moment, go ahead and take a freeze frame of your general sensory experience, all sensing at this particular moment, and do what the mind does naturally. Hold on to that experience. See if you can maintain connection with those sensations in that configuration. And this will seem to work for maybe a second, maybe even 3 seconds, as though we could hold on to some piece of this. And everything decays. And so we're creating a kind of caricature of what the mind does already, taking a freeze frame and looking to it to be stable. Noticing that what we get from this attempt at stability, the mind shows us the opposite. It shows us the decay. just for fun, we can use a label I like to use when I train my puppy. It works just about as well. Is the label stay. So capturing a freeze frame and telling it to stay. Stay just like it is right now. Noticing that, just like my experience with my puppy, it doesn't seem to work terribly well. So we're experimenting with this bit of futility to draw out and make clear the tendency of the mind to do this unconsciously. And so now we're going to do something a bit different. We're going to connect with a general sense of our universe, our sensory collection at this moment. And watch it disappear. It's typically replaced by something else, but we're less concerned by what it's replaced by. And more with the fact that it goes away. It empties of existence. The mind flickers. Some other sense data arises. And whatever we had contact with falls into the void. What we might call not this. There is this, which the mind shows us emphatically over and over again. But then there's not this. That is the absence of this. Noticing in this strange way that the presentness points to its own absence. Not doing this as a mental exercise, thinking about what this might be, but just sensing. Observing how the sensations, for instance, of our left hand feel so clear, present. But those sensations are surrounded by emptiness, non-sensations all around them. And the sensations themselves are replaced by new ones. So if it's available, soaking into the not this, that which is not our current universe, our current sense constellation. If the mind is confused, that's quite natural. Perhaps attending to some sensation that doesn't require as much narration, as much understanding, perhaps the body or sound. And perhaps we have contact with this void. Perhaps it's something we know from our experience. And simply checking in on the experience of self, of me, of I. Noticing if that experience of self is nervous, doesn't feel safe with contact with the emptiness. And there's two approaches to relate to this self. One is to see the self experience as just sensation, as being a present experience, which again points to its own absence. But this might not be soothing to this self. In fact, it might make it more resistant, fortify this experience of self. So we might choose a different tactic. Holding this self from a perspective that would meet its needs. Perhaps its needs for safety. And taking some time to luxuriate in the safety that can be produced by holding a self, by meeting its needs. By not trying to suppress it or make it go away, giving it space. And noticing as we do this, allowing the self to be, allowing the self to have its own experience, giving it space, noticing if there's some part that's asking the self to be gone or be different, recognizing that as sensation, recognizing that as simply another piece of sense activity. letting the part that pushes against the self, let that be deconstructed. And noticing if that allowing, that opening, allows the self to feel more free, less bounded. Noticing that this open, perhaps more free experience, if that's what's occurring for you, feels more like the open spaciousness of awareness, the connection with the void, the spaciousness. And staying with the practice, staying in stillness, allowing a tiny bit of light to enter the eyes, eventually allowing the eyes to rest on a single point as they fully open. Letting go of anything we think is important about the meditation. It's gone now. And letting this moment here, with the eyes open, teach us about presentness, emptiness, and how we might hold and have contact with any particular self that needs us, that needs our care. And letting this particular moment right now, letting this be the great teacher that shows us how to bring this practice into every aspect of our life. Okay, so making any adjustments you need to allow the body to be comfortable. Okay, new feature of this recorder that I have, apparently. When you turn the mic off to ask your wife a question, it shuts off the power. That's a beautiful feature. I didn't even know I had paid for that. So, folks, what was that experience like? What happened and what are you like now? So on our last stream, someone came on to Zoom to ask a more extensive question. They wanted to get into their personal practice. So if you have a question about your personal practice, I'm going to put the link in the chat now. Let me know if you'd like me to jump on, and I'm happy to. I usually leave it off because it interferes with the camera lately. I've noticed that. Maybe I'll just see what happens, see if it freezes randomly, like it likes to do. Beep, boop, pop, pop, pop. Here we go. Starting the meeting. Okay, excellente. So, folks, what was that like? What happened and what are you like now? So I want to just give a quick recap of what happened just now. So I was answering this question, which I'm going to get into in a moment, from someone on our stream entry. And of course, just so folks know, I usually will start with our questions that arrive on our Discord. Our Discord should be, does this link still work? Let me just find out if my secret link still works. Well, it puts up a link. I don't know if that link is active and will function for people. If it doesn't, let me know and we'll create a new invite. But that is our link to our Discord. That's where we usually will take questions from for the stream. But today we took a question from a subreddit called r stream entry, and the question was about the void. And I wanted to start from a place where we could talk about the sort of potential terror of being pulled into the void. And what I realized as I began to guide the meditation was that unless you have direct contact with this, it's not going to be very helpful to sort of go through a set of skills that might be helpful when coming in contact with that material. So the first section was really about getting in contact with that. Thinking about it, there are other ways to get in contact with that experience of the void, and many people have had different experiences along the way. But there is something about annihilation. There is something about the end of our world as we know it that, surprise, surprise, can feel a little disconcerting. So what I've been doing lately, I had a lot of different techniques and strategies that I would use in the past, but what I've been doing lately, which I like the most, is using the multiple self model and attending to the self that has resistance and treating that self, one, as natural. So beginning by recognizing that, of course, this self feels this way. It's being asked to be annihilated. So attending to that self without needing to change it or push it or drive it away. And that's really essential. We can't try to suppress a self that is afraid of being annihilated if we're trying to, if we want it to reduce in intensity. That's only going to increase it. And generally, it's only going to increase its intensity. That doesn't mean that, only using the multiple self model is the only way to get there, but there has to be a kind of fundamental equanimity with that self. Then I wanted to point out, which we did in the meditation, that having that kind of acceptance can often feel extremely freeing. Like, oh, hey, you're here. I'm not trying to change you. I don't need you to be different. What do you need? Trying to meet the needs of that self. We sometimes can do that verbally, but we can sometimes just do it just by a sense of how we hold that experience. And noticing that the holding of that self in that way can feel liberating. It can feel like, oh, that self can finally have some room. The part that's pushing and suppressing and pushing against that self can, step back, giving that self, the more vulnerable self, a little bit of breathing room. This is part of our ongoing theme we've talked about for a number of streams. And if you want some more details on how to do that, the previous stream, which we actually released as a standalone video like an hour and a half ago, that is an excellent, it's one version of that, and we sort of go over a lot of the sort of material related to that. So, jumping into comments, Lewis says, my initial assumption was that turning into the void would make sense. Turning into the void would make sense experience fade away somehow, but actually contact with the not this made this even more vibrant in contrast. Yeah, I mean, this is when we come to this idea of form is emptiness and emptiness is form. This is what we're talking about, that the void is pointing us to the solid narrative, continuous, ongoing sort of sense of a me and a world and self, and it's pointing to that because it's what it's built out of. It's the same material. It's like matter and antimatter or something. It's like they depend on each other. And if we train the system well enough, observing the solidity of the world points us towards the void. This points to not this, and not this points to this. Although, I mean, it's worth saying that the not this is much, much more abstract and open and empty and doesn't seem to refer to any particular... It's like, Shinzen says this thing that every arising seems to have its own, personality, character, sort of traits. It's like this, but every passing and every piece of the emptiness is sort of universally similar in a way, and that's my experience. That the void is sort of universal, and it doesn't. I guess what I'm describing is something very particular here. It seems like this points to this, not this. This points to its own absence, but that absence, the emptiness, doesn't point in particular back to this. It points to sort of, I don't even, does it point? Whatever. We're getting in pretty abstract territory with pretty concrete terms, which is always a little dangerous. So, yeah, lovely. So I wanted to actually clue people into what the actual comments are. So I'm going to skim over these really quick. Okay. And actually, maybe sharing it on the screen is not going to help because it'll be so tiny. So this is a comment I'm going to sort of summarize here by Powerful Strong from Reddit. They say, hope everyone's well. Over the past few years, I've been practicing meditation, exploring various traditions, and stumbled upon Shinzen's system. I focused on a do-nothing technique and started to experience high levels of concentration, especially at night, sometimes waking up into them. So that's actually just generally quite common, especially as we develop experiences, like higher experiences of concentration, because there's a lot of, the sort of meditation theory that what's happening in sleep is very close to what happens in our samadhi, jhana sort of states, and that's been my experience too. Is if I'm really focusing heavily on samadhi practice, it's happening throughout the night. And actually, what's happening now is that I get such strong PT sort of in the night. It's hard. It's hard to sleep sometimes. So I realized I should probably push through that so I can sleep a little better. Okay, so waking up onto them one night, I woke up and lay awake for some time in a do-nothing state. So somebody else comments like later on, which they're like, this sounds like dullness. It basically, this person later on who commented like, is this dullness? It seems like they're just using a different vocabulary than what, or you're probably, this person's familiar with. Powerful Strong is familiar with through Shinzen. So, and I'm sure you, Powerful Strong, would probably agree that saying a do-nothing state can be confusing, what we mean by a state. But I understand exactly what you mean by do nothing, and that that often puts you very quickly in contact with the void, that kind of practice. Although it can be agonizing because it's like the system tearing itself apart. It's like, and there's no intervention of any kind. It's just watching the system break down. And I think that the ego is so heavily associated with volition that when we take the volition sort of quality away, that can be very effective and also disconcerting. Rory says, when you attend to not this, doesn't it become the current this? Well, it depends. So Rory, just a quick comment here. We're talking about noting new and noting gone. So it could point you towards new again, right? But it could actually just point you towards gone. And so it's a little bit like, if I do this, right? Are you paying attention to the fact that my hand appears? Usually that's what the mind will do. Okay, something new occurred in my visual field, or the fact that the hand is not there anymore, right? And so you can pick which one you do. Now it's harder to notice the absence of something, especially if it's just sort of exerted itself experientially, but we can train the mind to do that. Monica, welcome. Good to see you. Hi. Overall, via looking at the multiple selves, one pushes and the other pushes the other to be annihilated, and the other thinking that to be true. Yeah, that often with various selves that arise, they work in contrast, and it's helpful to know that we can say like, if we're like everybody, or like we're like, oh, I feel judged. I'm judged. I feel judged, right? Well, unless we're, doing the walk of shame via, like Game of Thrones, shaved heads and nude in the street while everyone throws horse dung at us, we're probably not currently receiving actual shaming usually, right? But we can feel ashamed, or we feel like we're less than, or any of these sort of internal things that we can feel when it's not happening around us. Well, what that means is we've internalized that, which is quite normal. And so there's part of us that is shaming us. And so part of the multiple self model is disaggregating that and recognizing that there's part of me that feels ashamed, and there's part of me that's pushing against me to feel ashamed. Now, my own personal experience, if this is helpful, is at first my experience was a lot of anger at that part of myself that is treating me, is shaming internally or is judging internally. And that was actually kind of freeing. It helped me see how that part that felt shame could have more space and be like, screw you, with, more colorful language. And it was just like, I remember that self, the more vulnerable self, would be like, nobody likes you. And it's like the things it would yell at the judging self were so childlike. It was, sort of very touching and also very sad. Nobody likes you, everyone hates you, and it felt empowering for that more vulnerable self. And as you might guess, it's not really, wholesome or not really healthy to disregard or push away any self. And so what was helpful for me was this recognition that, that self is actually quite young and confused. And so it's like telling a child, nobody likes you, in order to make it be better. So it's like, yeah. So, Monica, you then say, has been very confusing and disorienting, especially for my practice. I don't know why I am practicing anymore, and I don't know what to believe. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, and that sounds like a good thing to talk about if ever you want to chit-chat about that. We don't have to today, but that might be a good thing to chit-chat about that. And this is also why, generally for folks, I will recommend the values exercise. Like anyone and I actually realized, Monica, you were at the retreat, and I got confused and thought you were in the Progress of Shinsight class. And then I looked for your name in the roster, and I was like, well, where's Monica? So I'm going to put this in the chat here. Okay, deepmindfulness.io/tools. So at this link is a tool that's a values worksheet. And the values worksheet, oh, you know what? Yeah, okay. I'm using a different one now. I want to switch it to this new one. Okay. That one's a good place to start to get a sense of all the values. If you want the other one, let me know. And it helps solidify why we're doing this. And honestly, I think that if some people were really honest about their practice and they would really look at their values very closely, they realize, hey, I actually don't want, some of the turbulence that can arise from awakening. Or maybe better would be to say, right now isn't the right moment, and I need to sort of put my attention over here. So that's often how I help people work with and resolve that sense of disorientation. But just know also that that's normal, and yeah, it's understandable. It's understandable to sort of not know which direction to go in. So thank you for sharing that. But then let's talk more. I'd be happy to be helpful if I can. Okay, so let's see. I want to return to this comment here by Powerful Strong. Powerful Strong then goes on to say, okay, do nothing. Say, suddenly I felt myself, quote, myself, falling into the void. And that's actually probably pretty accurate, that there is a self that is being pulled into the emptiness and it doesn't like it, which is, it's helpful to recognize it that way. It's not that the void is, there is a duality. There is a gravitational pull. And so what we typically are used to is like, well, then let go of the part that's pulling. It's like, well, that's not always our choice, especially if we have, any experience with trauma. And it can often be more important to address the trauma than it is to sort of dive into the void right away. But that's going to be a question for you, and you want to take care around that. Okay, so myself falling into the void, but not merely falling, being drawn, exactly, because that's the gravitational pull of considerable practice. The system at a certain point gets a taste of the insight, it gets a taste of the direction, it gets a taste of the momentum, and will just pull you there. And part of what I would describe as awakening is where by default the sensory system is now pulling you there all the time. There's no out button, there's no way to escape that. It is, you are in a vortex of the system pushing you and driving you through this material without choice. And that choice is something that this is the question of informed consent. Like if you're bringing someone down the path of awakening, do they know that there can be a point where you don't get to choose anymore? And so people pass that point without ever deciding, but that's something you want to consider. It sounds a little bit like you're already feeling that gravitational pull, so something to consider. The more I let myself go, the harder it is to return. And this to me describes what, Leonard Cohen has this saying about the process of awakening. And he says, you either become the ocean or you're seasick every day. And this is about the dark night. Notice he doesn't say you learn to swim. Notice he doesn't say you build yourself a raft. Notice he doesn't say like you fortify your ship. He says you become the ocean. Now, it's worth noting, Leonard Cohen is a very serious Zen practitioner, doing a lot of do-nothing practice, actually probably doing a lot more expansion-contraction flow, which is what Shinzen describes, one of Shinzen's main systems. So the more you let yourself fall into it, the harder it is to come back. And I think part of the premise is to recognize that there is no back, there is no return at a certain point. Which is what I was describing before. It was scary. It was scary because it seemed like the only way to turn it off was to not relax, right? To retighten, refortify, re-solidify, and let go for sleep, unconsciousness. Not surprising. Again, also maybe skillful. Maybe it's not the time right now, and the premise is to try to slow it down. Maybe not, but that's something you want to be very careful with and assess with your support team, your support network. Okay, so it kept me awake for most of the night. It stayed with me a few nights, and I played with it, but never fully let go. This has happened to me 3 times now, most recently last week. One thing to note is that the void feeling occurs in my head. It was recently given. Oh yeah, I remember this part, reading this before. So one thing is that the void feeling occurs in my head. So I wouldn't pay that much attention. What you can do if you want to break that down, if that feels like pertinent to you. And the next thing that's said here is, I was recently given advice that I should attempt to move that feeling to my chest, which these kind of like pronouncements, like this is what you should do, are like so ridiculous on their face. I mean, forget whoever said this, I'm sure believes and feels like this is true, but like that this is what you should do. This is how it should. That could be helpful. And I think that it's possible. And just remember, maybe that is actually the spirit in which somebody said that. They said, well, it could be helpful if you change that and move to the body. And maybe the system, our own body mind, heard that and said, oh, you definitely should do this. So just, I think the should part is potentially problematic, because keeping it in the head can be a problem. Well, listen, if it's what you're describing or what it sounds like you're describing, it's not going to stay anywhere localized. What's likely happening is that your sense of self, to some degree, is associated with the head, which it often is for many people, this sense of that there is a self, back here, that is observing in some way, and often sometimes with the chest, depending on like that the self is sort of in the chest, which makes sense in terms of protecting vital organs. It would be helpful for a biological system to, associate those parts of themselves with self. So I'm just going to skip past that for now. But I didn't get details as to what specific problem could arise, dark night, etc. FYI, lately I've been practicing shikantaza, meaning also do nothing, and occasionally Shinzen style vipassana. So when you said the dark night, I mean, basically the way I describe the dark night is you have opposing forces. One is a force pulling you towards freedom, right? And freedom isn't freedom ain't free. Freedom isn't neutral necessarily. I mean, freedom is actually radically neutral. Sorry, freedom isn't experienced as neutral. Freedom can be experienced as incredibly scary, right? It's just, there's no ground, there's no up or down, there's no inside or outside. All the things that we use to typically solidify our experience of safety and comfort and our narrative selves, it's being asked to let go of all that. So there's one force which is freedom, and there's one force which is safety, and these two forces are struggling, which creates a kind of turbulence. One is like, no, stay stable, and the other one's like there is no such thing as stability, here, allow me to tear you to pieces. And I think part of the premise is a little bit of faith that, again, okay, I'm going to back up here. So one is I would just immediately check in with your support network. Do you have enough support to go through something very disorienting? I mean, the sort of joke is like, with your life the way it is now, could you manage your work life, your children, whatever it is, also like on like 3 or 4 hits of acid all the time? Not to say that's going to happen to you, but you want to, have a sense of the intensity level, right? Potential intensity level. So is that something that you would be stable enough to comfortably handle? For some people, the answer is like, yeah, sure, that's not a problem. I have enough stability. I have, the therapy that I need supported. I have the community around me if I really need help. I know how to use meditative techniques to cool the system out if it's getting too intense. And I have a guide that I can regularly check in with and say, hey, here's what's going on. Who knows this territory? Who can navigate this? If that's the case, then you might be like, yeah, this is fine. For many other people, probably most other people, it's going to be quite difficult to navigate this material. It's going to be quite difficult to do this alone. It's going to be quite difficult to do this without therapy. And I'll mention also that often therapists can misunderstand what we're describing as, standard psychosis or, being manic or these kind of things. And it's partially a problem of the sort of diagnosis culture, and like in therapy and in psychology, often diagnosis is like the first thing you do. You teach students how to diagnose. Okay, someone said this particular word. That to me is a signal that there's this potential difficulty, and we might need to hospitalize this person. So it's a tricky ground because some of these things might just be meditation related, and some of them might not, and we want to be very clearly aware of that. So in a way, it's like we have to have mental health. Ideally, we're going to have mental health support that is robust enough to just sort of be aware, okay, this could be something, but we're just going to keep an eye on it. And you're reporting enough that there's clarity. You're honest enough that that's the case. So that would be first is are you stable enough that you could handle the instability? Then the next thing would be what part is resisting this movement? And not only, and this is what we were talking about a moment ago with Monica, not only what part is resisting the movement, right, but what part is saying that resisting part is bad, right? We spoke about this on the last stream, that from a Buddhist point of view, there can be the sense that like self, bad, non-self, good. And we want to be able to step out of that paradigm because, again, that's just another duality that's, alienating us from actually experiencing neutrality or experiencing the void in this way. So which part is resisting? Which part is telling that resisting part you shouldn't exist, right? And what we did today in today's practice was letting some of those deconstructive pieces work on that, the protector self that's trying to push down the more vulnerable self. Let that be deconstructed to allow the more vulnerable self space to breathe. That's just my experience, is the part that feels like it's being pushed down needs some space and room to feel like, okay, I'm allowed to exist. I don't have to like keep self-compressing or allow myself to be compressed. And that can be enough to let the system be like, yeah, cool, that's fine. We can handle some emptiness. No big deal. Sometimes it's not, though. And sometimes we need to just take a break and say, hey, what does this self need? And maybe that self really what it needs is to not be exposed to that kind of terrifying, deconstruction. And part of our job is to respect that. If we can't really, it's like I have a puppy, and last night I was grooming it, so I'm giving it a haircut. I'm sort of trying to teach it to get used to, me fiddling with its nails, fingernails. Are they what is it on a paw, toenails, fingernails? Are they? I don't even know. What are those? Are they dog fingers? Are they dog toes? That's weird, man. Weird, man. So trying to get it used to this process, and if I push it past where it is actually comfortable and where I think it should be comfortable, like, you shouldn't be that bothered by this. I've been training you to let me touch your nails this whole time. I can shave the hair that's growing out of the bottom of your paw, which is something you have to do. And it's like, no, and it keeps like jerking back, and I'm just like, nah, that's cool. That will push the dog to be more afraid naturally, and push the dog to be less likely to let me do this the next time. So I have to train through that again. And that's, we got to treat these parts of ourselves like a child that doesn't know that it's okay to let go, that doesn't know it's okay to let go of the transitional object, which is self and world, right? As a children are given a blankie, and it's the transitional object between them and their mother, right? It's the thing that makes them feel like, I have a sense of connection with this caretaker, and so this is the thing that's so delightful. But then that child goes out and meets other children and starts to try to play and connect and have a new kind of freedom. But there's this blanket, and it keeps getting caught up, and it's safety. But I want to be free. So the blanket, and they have to decide at some point, which do they choose? Do they choose the safety, or do they choose the freedom? And what might be necessary, which is what I'm describing here, is maybe more work needs to be done with the child to let them feel safe. If you just yank away the blankie right away, well, what's that going to result in? It's going to result in a lot of pain and probably trauma, and probably an ingrained sense internally for the rest of their lives that they shouldn't let go of safety, that freedom is dangerous. So this is sort of the root of what we talk about in terms of the multiple self model. Certain parts of ourself have been taught over time that it's not safe to exist or to feel or to have contact with, certain material. And it's up to them solely, it's up to them to manage reality so that they don't have to have those experiences. And each of those selves doesn't know that there is any other self, doesn't know that there's a kind awareness that could help us navigate that. And we talk a lot more about the kind awareness, cultivating that as a kind of self, as a kind of uber self, that when we're in a more relative, less sort of formless experience of the world, which is much of the time, that is a place where we can cultivate a self, where we can let self sort of reside. Each of those individual selves does not know that there is a place of freedom and peace that can be gentle and meet all of its needs in that way. So that's part of our job, is to cultivate that and to teach those parts that it is safe, and we're not going to push them, or we're not going to force them to do anything that they don't need to do. So the short version of what I just said is, if you push faster than those selves can handle, if you move at a different timeline than their timeline, they're just going to push back, and it's not going to be proportional. They're going to push back a lot harder because it's existential for them. If they are harmed or pushed against in a way that feels like it's threatening to their existence, they will fight back in the form of addiction, in the form of rage, in the form of all these things that we do that are unskillful, misguided, etc. Like, why did I do that thing? It's like, well, often we didn't do that thing, or the self that we are occupying at that moment didn't. It was this more vulnerable self that was asked to do something that is not appropriate, but it felt like it had to handle because it doesn't feel safe to let go. So hopefully that is a good answer to your question. Powerful, strong. I love the name, by the way. So Rory says here, I think they have toes unless your dog has hands. I know, that's what I think too. That's what Raquel was saying, is like, are they 4 feet or are they 4? Because they're equally as opposable. So it's like, are they hands? I like to think of the idea of like because a dog's like a monkey, right? And a monkey the monkey doesn't have feet over here, but it has opposable, you know what I mean? So it's like, really, it just has 4 hands. I like to think of the dog like that it has just 4 hands. So lovely. Folks, great to see you here. I have a wish for you before we disintegrate here, before we ourselves succumb to the great gravitational force of the ominous, beautiful, transcendent void that is the absence of the live stream. This present live stream is pointing to not this, which is the absence of the live stream, which is pointing once again to the presence of the live stream, which will be back here in fewer than 48 hours. That's right. Fewer than 48 hours. You can count them on all of your fingers and toes if you and a friend get together. Is that right? No, because you'd need another friend. Okay, so you, a friend, and a dog. Not even a dog, because the dog has way more. It's overkill. What? You, a friend, and 3 goldfish could easily count how long it'll be until now in the next live stream, which is just fewer than 48 hours this coming Friday. Love to have you here. Love to see you. Love to chit chat like kitty cats. Folks, I have a final wish for you. That wish is very simple, very straightforward, ideally. And that wish is that today you can have contact. Actually, forget today. Right now. Right this very minute. You can have contact with the presentness of your general experience, the presentness of your world, your universe, and allow that presentness to show the way to the open, magical voidiness of existence, and that parts that arise to resist that experience, that those be given a wide berth, that they're given what they need, they're given the care that they've been so deeply lacking, just for a moment to allow ourselves to meet our own needs internally so that we might meet the needs of others externally. Lovely to have you here. Great to see you. Look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Okay.